Welcome to the Convex Conversation with me, broadcaster Helen Fospero. This week's guest spent 20 years as a high-flying corporate executive and a director at Selfridges. But Laura Harnett, a mum of two, decided to give up her safe corporate role, throw caution to the wind and become an entrepreneur in her 40s. Frustrated by supermarket aisles of plastic-filled cleaning products, Laura spotted a gap in the market and founded Seep, designing eco-friendly, plastic-free, biodegradable cleaning accessories using natural renewable sources like wood, pulp, maize and bamboo. Seep was named Sustainable Brand of the Year in the Startup 100. Laura won a prestigious award in Shenzhen in China for innovation and confesses that never in a million years did she imagine she'd be championing humble cleaning sponges. It's just been announced that more than 500 Tesco stores nationwide are going to stock her products. And as sales continue to rise, she's on target to eliminate 1 billion plastic cleaning products from landfill by 2030. But Laura's journey from the boardroom at Selfridges to B Corp founder isn't the story I was expecting when we met by chance at an event she was speaking at in London. Laura, thank you so much for joining me. I watched you make an 8-minute presentation on Seep in Hammersmith only a few days ago, realised to my delight that you designed the eco-friendly sponges that are in my kitchen sink, which all led to a bit of an impromptu chat about your story and the realisation that we're neighbours in Shepherd's Bush. It's all a bit of a small world, isn't it?
It's a really small world, and I love that setting up a business has allowed me to kind of meet people like you, because I think I started off my life in corporate world, and these kind of chance encounters seem to happen less, and I love the kind of what unfolds when I meet people like you.
I was telling the friend I was with actually that night in Hammersmith that we were recording today, and she said, "Oh my goodness," she said, "you don't let the grass grow under your feet, do you?" But there was just a really nice chemistry, and I was genuinely so excited that you'd created this product I'd been using. But let's start off with a bit about your life in the corporate world and a director of Selfridges. What were those times like for you, Laura?
So I didn't start off at Selfridges. I mean, obviously that's a pretty fabulous place to end up. I started off in the much less glamorous world of food buying, and at 21 I was the assistant buyer for tinned fish excluding tuna, which obviously doesn't really roll off the tongue and look great on a business card. But basically the view was tuna was too big and too strategic, so I had all the lesser known canned fish. But I started there, which is great commercial background, and then went into consulting for 10 years and travelled the world, worked for some of the biggest companies like Coca-Cola and IKEA, advising them on how to either cut costs or grow sales, which felt quite glamorous. And then I just couldn't do that anymore. And so then moved to operator side. So first at Kingfisher and then Selfridges. So it was a bit of a roundabout way of getting to Selfridges.
And what was Selfridges like to work at? I love Selfridges, and it does sound very glamorous and very dynamic, doesn't it?
It's exactly how you'd imagine, really. It's pretty iconic. It was one of the few retailers, it still is really, where they really invest in customer experience. A lot of retail has been struggling over many years now, cutting costs. But Selfridges has creativity and innovation at its heart. And so it was a super dynamic place to work. Really inspiring, and I learnt a huge amount. So that's, yeah. And whenever you had a low moment, you'd be able to push those doors open and walk into the store and find something magical.
Did you ever watch Mr. Selfridge when that was on?
Oh, yes, definitely. I got given the book when I first joined. And actually, he wrote this book that in many ways set the new standard for what retail should be about. He was way ahead of his time. So he was the first one to put toilets in for women. And he understood that if you brought people into a store and gave them things to do in store and so that they didn't have a reason to leave, that people would wander around and enjoy themselves, relax. And yeah, the other thing is that he did is take things out of cases so that people could touch and feel and get close to the product.
And Mr. Selfridge was played so beautifully, I thought, by Jeremy Piven.
Yes, it's brilliant.
It's nice to know that actually a lot of what we saw on screen was based on the true Mr. Selfridge story, because I remember things like that. Him saying to the assistants that if a woman wants to buy some gloves, she must touch them and try them on. So perhaps that wasn't the thing of the day then at the time.
No. Lots of the things we take for granted, especially like the beauty and perfume on the ground floor, that was because at the time in the streets, it was full of poo and it smelt. And so actually it meant that you came in and then you were immediately surrounded by this gorgeous smelling department store. So yeah, that was him again. And so, but now you take it for granted, that sort of beauty counter is always on the ground floor as you come in.
So what happened, Laura, to make you look at life differently, and why did you leave this wonderful cocoon of Selfridges behind?
Yeah, so the thing that probably most women dread. So I found a lump in my breast. I was 38, 39, I had 2 young kids, and that moment that you always imagine being the worst moment happened to me. So I went through breast cancer treatment for 9 months to a year, really. And it just changed my view on things. I just thought, right, I have the second half of my career. I want to do something that's a bit different and build a legacy of sorts. And at the time, I had been really conscious of the things that were in my house that could be affecting my health. And so the toxins and plastic, which is very topical, and spotted this opportunity in the supermarket. So I'll talk about it quickly, which is, so I was pushing my trolley around my local supermarket and I had lots of better for you, better for the planet products. So things like Dorset cereals and Tony's Chocolonely. And I walk down the cleaning aisle and I pick up some Ecover and Method, so non-toxic washing sprays. And then I look to find a tool, so a sponge or a cloth to go with it. And it all looked super old-fashioned, really old-fashioned. It's old-fashioned branding. It's all wrapped in plastic. And now I know that the products themselves are plastic and release microplastics. And so I was like, okay, this seems like a really obvious gap. Why has no one else done it? And I thought, right, well, someone else will come along and maybe I can support them. I'll back them. And then I just thought, actually, life, it's short. And if I don't do this and I get to, I don't know, 80, 70 or 80, and I look back and someone else has done it, and I didn't because I was afraid or worried about the risk, then I'll regret it. So I always talk about Seep being my silver lining from my breast cancer. It's something that was really good that came out of it.
In a way, do you think having that dreaded moment where you were told you got breast cancer, that we all go for our scans and we dread and pray that it isn't ours, in some ways, do you think that perhaps gave you courage and made you fearless in terms of thinking, right, actually, you know what, I am just going to take life by the balls and do this?
Absolutely. Nothing came close to that. So it really made me fearless. I used to be worried about how much money I had and saving and having a pension and a stable job, and that none of that really mattered. I just wanted to do something that would make me happy and that was good for the world. I think the hard thing is remembering that fearlessness. And because the longer you go and the further away you are from that moment, the more you revert to type. So you go, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that. And so that's what I have to remind myself.
Do you have anything that pulls you back in a way to that moment where if you're nervous about something you're doing, you think, actually, well, I'll just take my mind back here and remember why I'm doing this and how it all came about?
Yeah, I do. I look back at some of the really early days of setting up Seep, where everything felt pretty fearless. I'd never set up a warehouse before. I'd never actually designed my own product. I'd never set up a website. I always had teams that did that. And so when I want to lock back into that, then some of the first articles I ever wrote, and it just reminds you how far we've come, really.
And how did you start in terms of knowing what to use? Maize, bamboo, loofah, I think you use. How did all this research begin? And was this while you were still recovering that you used it as perhaps somewhat of a distraction?
So I had left Selfridges and I was doing some non-executive roles, non-exec director roles and some charity roles. And like many people, actually, lockdown happened and it gave me a bit of space to think about it. And I started really small. So if there's any of your listeners who have maybe got an idea and they don't quite know how to start, just do something small. And that's what I did. So I'd spotted this opportunity. I put a post out on Facebook, I think, and said, which of the following products do you replace most frequently? So I wanted to try and figure out, well, which of the 1 or 2 products should I start with? And I didn't have money to spend on market data. So I was like, I'll just ask my community and my friends and family on Facebook. And then what was clear was that it was that iconic washing up sponge, the kind of green on the top, yellow on the bottom.
That we've had since our grandparents' day.
Yeah, it's lurking behind every toilet and every sink, not just in the UK, but globally. Everyone recognises it. And so that's the product that everyone said they replace really frequently. And it was somewhere between every 2 weeks through to every few months. And so I was like, right, well, now I'm going to figure out how to do a better version of this. And so I called every single factory and place that produced sponges in Europe and said, how do we replace the bottom bit with cellulose wood pulp sponge? And so there are some products that exist in the market already. But I was like, how can I attach something that isn't plastic onto the top? And none of them would even return my calls. I mean, why would you? Because I didn't have anything. I didn't have a website, didn't have anything. And then I found that actually the loofah that you use in the shower could actually work quite well as the scourer on the top. And so then I kind of looked at where do they grow, and they grow in Egypt and China. Those are the two big, you can grow them around the world, but those are the two biggest.
That's amazing. I didn't even know they grow.
Well, lots of people think they're sea sponges, but they're not. They're like these enormous kind of cucumber-y type thing that grows on a vine. I describe them like snozcumbers. Do you know in the BFG, they have these snozcumbers? That's what they look like. And so then I figured out that was a loofah, and then we figured out where did they grow. And then through an old contact in my retail days, I found someone to help me in the Far East to figure out how to then attach this piece of loofah that grew out there onto the cellulose wood pulp. So yeah, that was it. And I told myself, if there's no good reason, so I did a whole bunch of analysis of what competitors were out there and could I buy it and sell it and actually make some money. And I told myself if I couldn't find a really good reason why I shouldn't do it, that I would place that first order. And that as soon as I did that, I would then post on LinkedIn and tell everyone, because that's the hardest thing, is actually telling people that you're doing this pretty crazy sounding thing.
Did lots of different versions of the sponge arrive at your home for you to test?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you were always in the kitchen sink?
Yeah, the kitchen sink, yeah. And then my parents, friends and family would all be testing them as well. And despite that, the first batch that arrived, you're just terrified to open it. I don't know if you've had that where you've written a book or something, you're so nervous about what it's going to look like when you open it up. But the first batch somehow, so the product itself is quite damp, and I hadn't realised that because we didn't want to use plastic, we'd put it in cardboard. And so the entire batch turned up just soggy. And so the version we have now is probably V10. We just keep improving it with feedback we're getting from customers.
And did friends and family, do you think, Laura, you hadn't been well? Do you think in a way they played along a little bit with you and your mission to save the world with the sponges, not really thinking that perhaps it would develop quite the way that it has?
I mean, it sounds pretty bonkers, doesn't it? And for a while, that's probably what kept me back. I was like, and it seems silly now, but I was like, how can I go from being at Selfridges to being the sponge queen? It's just, how am I going to walk into a networking drinks or something and say that's what I do? And I remember the first person I called with my idea is one of my best friends. She's called Jean, and she lives up in Norfolk, she's now our COO in the business. And I was like, Jean, just bear with me. I have this idea and it's about doing eco sponges. And she just said, it's like, I love you. I will support you and help you figure out if this is doable financially, because she's very strong financials. But, I could just tell she just thought I was insane. And so I think it was people wanted to support me because of what I'd gone through. But I think hopefully bit by bit we've been chipping away and people now see, I think people could see the opportunity, but not quite how big.
Bit by bit you were chipping away. And also when you did your 8-minute presentation in Hammersmith recently, you were announcing that more than 500 Tesco stores are now going to stock your products, which I think is incredible. I've learned a lot more about Tesco's actually in the last few months, and they do seem to be taking sustainability really seriously. And that's incredible, isn't it? From the moment you opened your box of soggy sponges in your kitchen sink to now being stocked by one of the biggest supermarkets in Britain, you're really going places now with it, aren't you?
It's that moment that you dream of. I remember when that flash of inspiration hit and I was looking at the aisle and there wasn't anything for me. And I was like, one day this is going to be up there. You work and work. We started online and then we moved to Amazon, and it was in my dreams that this would happen. And the retailers have had a tough time. The cost of living, they're really focused on reducing costs. And so it's been tough for smaller brands to get on the shelves. And Tesco have been really quite pioneering in saying, right, they want to bring products that are better for the planet, better for your health from smaller challenger brands. And we're lucky, really lucky to be one of those. And I think that moment that I was hoping for, though, what I've realised is that as an entrepreneur, you never feel like it's enough. You never think it's good. And you're like, the box wasn't quite right. And so you're constantly going, okay, that's great, but this is all the next set of things that I need to do. So,
and of course, does that impact the thing that's very difficult for smaller, younger brands to navigate, which is the funding of the brand? Because presumably if you're in more than 500 Tesco stores, as well as selling everywhere else, the quantity of your products will increase, I would imagine, dramatically.
Yes. So we've been growing really quickly, and what seemed like a lot of money at the beginning now is not enough for us to keep funding the inventory. And you have to build the team ahead of where it really, really can afford. And so I've been super lucky that I've had former colleagues and friends who have all helped with the funding journey. And then the trip to China that you talked about, that was Cartier, so the jewellery brand. I mean, you go like, what's the jewellery brand doing supporting a cleaning sponge business? It's not an obvious thing, but they support female founders getting funding. And actually, I think as a female founder, it's particularly tough. So I learned some numbers, the latest set of stats, I don't know if you know them, but...
No, go on, share them with me.
2.5% of capital deployed into early stage businesses goes to female founded businesses. 2.5%. And that was last year. This year, we're on track to 1.7%. So it's gone backwards. And so I think raising kind of serious amounts of money is hard for everybody, but it's particularly tough for female founders. And if you're someone from another background, then it's even harder. So that you have to manage alongside running the business and growing it.
That's absolutely extraordinary. Tell me about the trip to China, because you went to Shenzhen, didn't you, to receive the award. It sounds an incredible initiative by Cartier, and also something unusual, something you perhaps wouldn't expect them in the high-end jewellery world to be involved in necessarily. What's their aim? So
there are actually quite a few female accelerators or female founder support programs. This one, I think, is the best. And they've been going for 15, 20 years. And every year or every other year, they put out a call for applications, and then they pick somewhere between 25 and 30 female entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs that are building businesses that will impact the world, are better for the world in some way. So we're obviously in the sort of sustainability space, but there's some in the health space and some in the education space. And so 30 of us were then picked from around the world, which was pretty amazing. And we were all given grant funding, so money to fund something good in the business. They've given us coaching support, training, access to some of the inventory loans that really help, especially when we were scaling for Tesco. So, and for them, I guess it makes sense, right? So they're a brand all about celebrating women and with high-end jewellery. And then this is their philanthropic initiative to support women like me alongside. So it's great. What an honour to be picked. That's not many to be part of 30 odd women. And was the experience in China really wonderful? It was really wonderful on lots of different levels. It's surrounded by women who are going through the same highs and lows. And sometimes it's really quite a lonely journey. I have an incredible team and an amazing family. Actually just being able to go, look, I'm worried, or I don't know what to do. And being able to share that with other women in your shoes actually makes a huge difference. So, and they're from all over the world, Rwanda and South America, and doing incredible things. And so that was incredible. We went out to see some of the farms that the loofah's grown in and our factories, which was absolutely extraordinary, and the people making the product and seeing it properly. We have people out there that are monitoring everything and checking everything, but actually seeing it ourselves was pretty fabulous. And then the ceremony itself was ridiculously amazing. So Sandy Toksvig was the host, and it was live streamed to 11 million people in China. Which no pressure there then. We didn't realise it at the time. Who did you meet out there that you thought, gosh, that's another incredible story? I'm sure there were a number of women doing amazing things, but was there anything in particular, any business in particular that really stood out to you? Yeah, there's so many. I obviously haven't got time to mention all 30, but there's a few that I really think are fabulous, and they're all fabulous. But there's a lady called Ira who has a period cup product. So it's been developed in Harvard. It's won Evening Standard Awards, and it's one of the best designed period cups. And what's incredible is that each one that is bought here in the UK then funds one in India. And the stats are just staggering around how many women and girls are excluded from working and from education because they don't have access to those kind of sort of sanitary products. And that's what she's on a mission to help mitigate.
You make lots of different things now. It gets much more glamorous than sponges because we're into rubber gloves, all sorts of things now. Just give us a sense of flavour of the products that you've now grown the business in.
So our hero product's the sponge scourer. It's what people come back to us for and what we've become known for. But I know that people want more than just that. So we have a bamboo cloth that is our equivalent to the microfiber cloth, which is made from polyester. So it's a pretty turquoise colour. So what we try and do is design products that are better for the planet, but also that work really well. We have a lovely group of customers called the Seep suite who test all of our products and give us feedback. And then we also make sure that they look great, because if you've put a lovely kitchen in your house proud, what you don't want is one of those yellow and green products to on the surface next to your sink looking horrible. So we've got the cloth, we've got some rubber gloves, we've got a range of bin liners, we've got some scourers, so copper scourers, and some sponge cloths that are made from offcuts from the fashion industry. So it's cotton textile mixed with cellulose wood pulp. So they're a great alternative to something like a J cloth. So they're really absorbent and you can print lots of lovely designs on the front of it.
So talk to me about microplastics, and when we're using, say, for example, the sponge or a traditional cloth, how damaging and dangerous are microplastics and how do they get into our system, really? I suppose if we're washing dishes and cleaning and wiping surfaces with things that contain microplastics.
So something like the sponge scourer, so typically those green and yellow ones, you have little bobbly bits. You can actually see the bobbly bits on the top as they curl up through use. And
you've really studied these.
I know. Exactly.
There's nothing you don't know about a bobbly sponge.
A bobbly sponge, but it's and I always have this sort of image of them. And so those bobbly sponges, the bobbles is the microplast. So that's the top bit kind of breaking down and releasing very tiny strands of the polypropylene that's used for the top bit. And those are going into the water and out into the oceans when it's very difficult to stop them from going out, from being released. And then they're being left behind in your sink and you're washing up your dishes with them. And so I think we started off just thinking about the environmental aspect of microplastics. There's more and more research about how prevalent they are, how even in the Arctic and in the ice, they're still finding microplastics. There's nowhere that they're not. And so that environmental aspect's significant. But actually, you've probably seen lots of the articles now about how there's a closer and closer link between microplastics and the impact on human health. And so they've been found in brain, in placentas, in testicles. And it's something like there's hundreds of toxins in microplastics. And I have to be very careful here because I think there's a lot of claims that not all of them are substantiated, but these toxins are releasing things like hormone disruptors that affect our bodies. And so it kind of feels like it's coming full circle. So my breast cancer was a genetic one. Who knows what the triggers are to those sorts of things? And so what started off as a purely sustainability thing, it's now becoming a better choice for health as well.
I think people are slowly coming round to it. I think when you first start buying different things, I told you this when we met in Hammersmith, that we had a moment where we were on holiday with our friends Joe and Kevin, and we both pulled out your sponge. And crazy. Kevin's got a beautiful design sense. And I was like, oh, trust you to have the good looking sponge. And he's like, oh, trust you with all your interest in health and wellness to have the same thing. But I think there was a time where people thought you were a bit of a fruitcake if you were trying to buy washing powder without perhaps some of the chemicals in. But it's becoming a lot more the norm now. I think we are beginning to all realise that our world is full of toxins, and actually for our health, it would be better to try and eliminate them where we can.
Yeah, and this is a pretty easy way of doing it. So it's a one small change. I think if you add up all of those small switches, it can make a difference. And so I firmly believe that. And I think sustainability used to be very brown and green and in the hippie lands of the zero waste shops and the health food stores. And I think you have to be sustainable now as a brand if you want to grow. But you also have to understand how to become desirable so that your products look great, they work brilliantly, and then they just happen to be sustainable. So I'm hoping that this new era, which is it's sustainable by default, is what we're going into now.
I think it will just eventually become the norm. And of course, you'll also appeal to the generation like my daughter, who's about to turn 21. Our children are much more aware, I think, of sustainability and the issues with our climate than perhaps you and I may have been growing up. Tell me, Laura, if you can, about Seep's mission and how many items you hope that running this business will prevent going to landfill.
Yeah, we have a pretty big, hairy vision and mission, which is to eliminate 1 billion plastic cleaning tools from going to landfill by 2030. So we've eliminated about 5 million so far. And so we've got a long way to go, which means that we have to scale through the biggest retailers like Tesco. So it's amazing to have some partners like Tesco that can then help us get there. Yeah.
And what has your journey been like as a novice entrepreneur? Because you were clearly very experienced in business and very good with tinned fish, except for tuna, which I do love that line that they didn't let you loose on the tuna, but you were fine with mackerel and sardines.
Pilchards.
And pilchards.
And
head of pilchards. You actually sounds like you're now going up in the world. Sponge lady, Laura. You know that I'm only teasing you. But you did become an entrepreneur in your 40s at a different stage. And I think I read somewhere that you said that you felt startups were for young people until you read something that debunked the myth.
Yeah, I think when I was in corporate life, I felt like it was this incredibly exciting place full of bros playing table football and working late into the nights, right, and eating pizza with nothing to lose but everything to gain. And so I just thought I really envied them that they were able to take those kind of risks. And so I'd had my idea, and then I read this amazing articles in Harvard Business Review, and it showed the likelihood of success by age. And it showed that I think it was between your 40s and 50s, actually, you're far more likely to be successful, which makes sense. You've got a good network, you've probably got a bit more cash in the bank, you've learnt how to make decisions, and you've hopefully grown in confidence. And so I think that was one of the tipping points that made me think that I could do it.
And what lessons do you think you've learned, or what are the most valuable lessons, perhaps?
I think little steps. If someone had said, right, you're going to launch this, go for it. And actually the whole thing would have felt overwhelming. And I had some really good advice that was just every day do something, even if it's small, and just keep ticking things off. And so I think that was really great advice. And I think that the second piece of advice would probably be around get good people around you. And so I've been lucky enough to have some amazing advisors who have built and scaled businesses a bit like Seep and how I'd like Seep to be. And they've just helped me focus on the things that matter, because there's lots of little things that don't matter when you're building a business, but you don't have the time or the money to do it all. So I think those would be my 2 bits of advice.
Your learnings. And what about yourself, Laura? What have you learned about you on this incredible journey that you're very much still on?
I think that we all have the capacity to learn still. I thought I was a corporate person that wrote a good PowerPoint slides, and that's what I thought I was good at. And actually, what I've realised is that I love the learning journey. I've learnt all about social media. It's not something that I really looked at before. There would be other teams doing it. And we all have these amazing capacities to learn and to grow in ways that you didn't think were possible. And I think that's really exciting.
And if anybody's listening to this, maybe flirting with the idea of becoming an entrepreneur, but worried it may be that they're too late or that it might be too risky, what would you say to them?
I'd say kick the tires a bit. If you've got an idea, set yourself a few little goals just to see if there's some scope there. Ask some other founders. I think I've been so lucky to have just advice from lots of founders around me, especially female founders. Like, our superpower is the power of collaboration. I think we just do it so naturally. And they helped me. Well, they're still helping me all the time. And so I'd say talk to some other people who are maybe just a few steps ahead of you and see if it's for you.
And what's next for Seep, Laura? I know obviously Tesco's is very much on your mind right now, and I'm sure there's a lot to do to make all that happen. But what else is coming? What's 2025 look like for you? And perhaps longer term plan as well.
Yeah. And so next year's really important. So what they often say is getting a listing in a retailer is the easy bit, even though it felt not easy at all. Yeah, exactly. It's a long process. Actually, what they say is that the hardest bit is keeping it and making it grow. And because it's the first time really that your baby is out there for everyone to try. And so we really need to make that work next year with Tesco. And we have some exciting things lined up in the beginning of the year that I can't really reveal now, but will be revealed in time. And then hopefully some of the other retailers our mission is to disrupt that category, to make sure that there are choices that are better. And so long term, that's what I want to do. I want to, what Ecover Method have done on one side of the aisle, I want to do it on the other, not just in the UK, but around the world.
And how challenging is it? We're all in these habits where we go to the supermarket and we grab that. Gosh, I hope the person who invented the yellow and green sponge isn't listening. But we reach for that sponge just because it's always been there and that's what we've always done. How difficult is it to tempt somebody to try something new and to form a new habit? How hard is it to get your story out there and the message that if you do reach for yours, you're doing better for the planet and hopefully better for your own health?
Yeah, it's not easy because most people, when you've had the opportunity to talk about it, people are like, oh yeah, I hadn't thought that this sponge is made from plastic. And when people try it, they like it. So we do quite a lot of sampling. We work with content creators. We write articles. I speak at events like the one where you and I met. But I think it's hard when you haven't got the big budgets to be able to put it on billboards, but maybe one day.
We do often end this chat talking about risk. And when you look back, Laura, what's the biggest risk you feel you've taken in life? And it needn't be necessarily with becoming an entrepreneur and Seep. What is the biggest risk you feel that Laura has taken?
I think it is setting Seep up. One of the things I was told when I was coming through breast cancer was that you can reduce your chances of a recurrence by 40% if you eat well, exercise well, and have a relatively stress-free lifestyle. And setting up your own business and scaling it quickly doesn't necessarily tick the stress-free box. But I'm finding kind of enjoyment along the way and trying to do it in the way that feels right for me. And so it is a risk to my health and probably to our family's finances and professionally as well. But I've just loved it. I love it. I can't imagine myself doing anything else.
I think you mentioned stress there, but also I would imagine that it also releases a lot of dopamine and serotonin and the happy hormones because you clearly absolutely love what you do. How proud are your family? Because obviously your husband watched you and helped you through your cancer journey. Your children were young at the time. How does the family feel about the success that they see you're having and that the determination that you put in has led to all of this?
I think they're very proud, I would imagine. I keep it quite separate. Because I do, because I feel like my home is the place I relax and it's my sanctuary and I work long hours. So I don't necessarily come back and talk about it. But I love the idea of bringing them to some of the pitch events that I'm at. They've never seen me talk about it on a public platform. And I think that's probably the next step.
That's amazing. How old are your children now?
14 and 12.
Oh, so a really lovely time just when they're starting to think perhaps about their future and what they might want to do. Lovely to see that contrast between mum at home and then out there as an entrepreneur. That's quite a wonderful thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah, and inspiring, hopefully, especially for my daughter. So there's this amazing organisation called Buy Women Build. I don't know if you know it.
No, I don't.
And it was set up by an amazing lady called Sahar Hashemi, who was the original founder of Coffee Republic, and a chap called Barney. And they set it up because there was a piece of research asking kids if they could name female entrepreneurs. And the stats came back, I'll get them wrong. So it was 80-90% could not name a single female entrepreneur. And of course, you can't become something if you can't see it. And so their mission at Buy Women Built is to encourage people to buy. You might not be able to invest in female entrepreneurs, but you certainly can buy them and support them in other ways. And so for my daughter and my son, I want them to be able to see what you can build, whether you're a woman or a man.
Gosh, I'm so glad I bumped into you. That event was lovely, wasn't it?
It was so brilliant.
A great event. We listened to 8 speakers all doing 8-minute presentations. And it was so exciting and so random that I ended up chatting to you. And here we are, a week or two later, sitting in the studio recording the podcast. And it's a wonderful story, Laura. I wish you all the best with it. I'm going to extend my range now. I didn't realise you did gloves and cloths and all that kind of thing. So, and when are you in Tesco, by the way? When does that start?
We're rolling out now, so we should be available. There's a store locator on our website if you're curious, if it's in your local store.
You've been listening to Seep founder and entrepreneur Laura Harnett. Don't forget to download our series at convex.podbean.com or search The Convex Conversation on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to yours. I'll be back next week with our final guest this season, investigative journalist Glenn Campbell. You may have seen Glenn in the 3-part BBC documentary series Lucan on his decades-long search for the fugitive lord who disappeared without trace following the murder of his children's nanny, Sandra Rivet, in 1974, a mystery that's baffled detectives and fascinated the press for half a century. Join me then.